Seeing the big picture isn't always easy for me, what with a constant flash of bright shiny objects of distraction, the din of self-serving noise, and the near complete lack of veracity from official sources. Whatever is happening, I try to avoid a knee-jerk reaction to the latest outrage and instead put some effort into thinking big picture. Sometimes I succeed. I got some help for that last week and hereby pass it along to you. Let's start with the key to what brought us to where we are now, the big picture. Public apathy. Specifically, apathy toward elections. You already know that it's largely agitated people who are motivated to show up and vote in primary elections. That leaves us with a problem. Here's how it works. These folks make up about 1/3 of the electorate, but they have oversized influence because few moderate voters show up for primaries. That means that this angry 1/3 of voters decides who your choices will be when you show up in November for the general election. Worse, in the general election, the winner will have garnered only a smidgen over 50% of the votes. So our elected officials are decided by just 17% of eligible voters. But wait, it gets worse than that. Only about 60% of eligible voters shows up for the general election. That means that the winner of a general election is decided by just 10% of our eligible voters. And because that 10% has a large component of hair on fire types, we get flamers in Washington. See the sidebar in the written post and link through to the article for an example. This guy is hardly unique. He's just the most recent. The fact of agitated people making up the preponderance of primary voters is why moderate Republicans aren't standing up to obvious malfeasance. It's because doing so will anger the base, code for angry voters. And in the next primary, some far-out goofball will defeat the moderate. That causes moderates to have elective surgery to remove their spines when they get to Washington. It's so they can keep their jobs. Did I mention that it gets worse? It does. The Supreme Court delivered its insane decision on the Citizens United case in January 2010. It was one of the most devastating and inappropriate decisions the court has made because they delivered not one, but two decisions, the second of which was over an issue that wasn't in dispute in the case. That opened the door to the bottomless supply of money that buys our entire elective process, exactly as President Obama predicted would happen at his State of the Union address later that same month. Chief Justice Roberts shook his head in disagreement, but he and his four friends, it was of course a 5-4 decision, were blindly wrong in expanding the case to something completely outside the dispute in question, as well as wrong about what would happen. And that, plus moderates surrendering elections to extreme voters, gets us less than the best legislators, less than the best judges, less than the best policies, and the dysfunction and corruption we have right now. Ours is a devastatingly compromised democracy. That's the big picture I see. Now here's the help I mentioned in the opening of this piece. Read Jim Hightower's current lowdown to see how your pockets are being picked. There's a link to it and all the recommended pieces in the written post. Trump's only legislative win is the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which he and the proponents of this larceny claimed would increase workers' wages. Apparently, they felt that dangling that before voters would cause us to support the annual $1 trillion giveaway to the wealthy. I know you review your paycheck carefully, so how much more are you getting? Nothing. Nada. And that's the point. That piece of legislative theft is just the most recent example of exacerbating wealth inequality, and it came about because we elected self-serving radicals to be in the majority. Or should I say, 10% of voters did that, and many of the rest of us stood by and let that happen. Clearly, many people were motivated to turn that around in the 2018 election. Perhaps that's a beginning of change, but it's only useful if we continue that change. By the way, while you're on Jim Hightower's site, have a look at his clarification of populism. You might be surprised to learn that populism isn't at all what many would have you believe. It isn't about torches and pitchforks. There are consequences to massive wealth inequality, and the world has lived it repeatedly. Read futurist David Hoole's current piece to enhance your view on this. I'm reminded of the cynical declaration commonly attributed to Marie Antoinette about the French poor. Let them eat cake. There was no cake for them, nor bread either. Perhaps you remember that the French Revolution happened shortly thereafter in 1789. The point is that there's a limit to what people will tolerate. We demonstrated that ourselves at the Boston Tea Party. The question is whether we will take action before things get really dangerous, which leads to how we'll do that. Represent Us is an organization dedicated to setting things right before we pass a point of no return. Watch the video Unbreaking America, narrated by Jennifer Lawrence and Joshua Graham Lynn, for a clear explanation of what's going on and what we can do about it. It's well worth 11 minutes of your time, and if you'd like to see the research mentioned in the video, click the link in the written post for a PDF download. Be sure to note the next to last paragraph on page 3. Back to the big picture. All we have to do to turn this mess around is to abandon our apathy. I'm Jack Alshuler.